Okay, so we're just going to start with what the new features in 6.00. Starting off, we're going to talk about archiving of clean mails. Effectively, what this is the ability to quarantine clean messages which pass through the appliance. Now, currently, or prior to 6.00, the only thing that was quarantined was spam or banned attachments or viruses, which subsequently could be released from the quarantine. The archiving of clean emails takes on pretty much the same kind of methodology. If you enable archiving of clean messages, which is disabled by default in all policies, you can, once enabled, see the message in the quarantine or via the history. Okay, so as I mentioned there, the archiving of clean mails is controlled on a policy basis, either a per domain policy basis or user policy basis. So this appliance has got some test domains set up already. As you can see here, most of the policies have archiving turned off, but example.org has it on. Again, in the policy settings, it's just one setting, enable, disable. So for instance, for test.com, we can just say, come in here, enable archive of clean emails, and we'll see that it's been listed here as archived. Now, what we can see when this is enabled is, if we go to the history page and view messages, so I've sent some test mail through this system earlier on, so we can see there's some clean mails, some spam mails. Now we know that mails to example.org has archiving of clean emails enabled, so and mails to SpamTitan.com has archiving of clean emails disabled. So if we look at this message, for instance, first of all, so this is what you would have typically in 5.13, where clean messages, you cannot view them. If, however, we look at the clean mail for example.org, we can see that we can view the message, and we have the ability to release the message, whitelist the sender, delete the message. Delete the message just basically stops it being archived anymore. We can forward it on to the quarantine administrator, or quite importantly, is the ability to mark the message as spam. So if, for instance, we look at this message and say, okay, source here. If we see that, okay, this isn't a pretty good example because there's not much in this one, but if we look at one down here, okay, we can see this message. Okay, it looks quite spammy, so we're going to say, okay, this is a false positive. We'll mark the message as spam. We'll see immediately the message here gives you the ability to undo your change. But effectively now, that message will be learned by Bayes, and future messages looking like that should be caught. So that's basically the archiving of clean emails. The development in SpamTitan is driven by users' feature requests and missing functionality. Greylisting is a feature request that we've had in the product probably going back to 5-6 years. And it's something that we were very reticent about adding to the product because we felt that it wasn't actually required. So what we've done in 6.00 is we've added in the ability to use Greylisting. Again, when you update to 6.00 from a 5.13 machine, it will be disabled, as it will be if you have a new install. So you have to actually enable the feature for it to work. Effectively, what Greylisting is the ability to delay or defer messages from unknown senders. So if we get a message in from a sender that we haven't recognized before, we'll basically reply during the SNMP handshake, please try again later. And all compliant mail servers will do just that. They'll put the message into the defer queue, and then 5, 10, 15 minutes later, they'll retry the delivery of the mail. So once we get the redelivery attempt, we'll accept it. Now there's a few different features that we have in the Greylisting. We have the ability to auto whitelist email addresses and domains. So for instance, if we receive several messages from a particular sender or IP address, we'll automatically whitelist that IP address, so we won't continuously graylist that server. So basically, over time, it'll only be new correspondence that will be affected by graylisting if you want. Now, the advantage of graylisting is, of course, that if botnets which have maybe a very simple SMTP server, all they care about is spewing out spam as quickly as possible, and they don't care about redelivery. So if a botnet, for instance, is graylisted, typically they won't bother retrying, and as a result, we cut down spam. The downside, I guess, of graylisting, if there is a downside, is that although most mail servers are meant to be compliant, that isn't always the case. So you could have a legitimate mail server that doesn't retry a delivery attempt when it gets a temporary rejection. So when you enable graylisting for the first time, we ship the product with a large list of whitelisted servers which are known to be not graylisting compliant, and of course then you can add yourself your own whitelist if you want, and then of course the auto whitelisting. So maybe I'll just show you these features now in the actual product. Let's get back here again. So again, it's under the system setup mail relay page. We have a new tab here called Greylisting. So as I mentioned before, graylisting is disabled by default. When we enable it, all new messages into the system will be subject to graylisting. Now, the reason there's exceptions, of course. If you have, for instance, here our internal network, we're not performing any graylisting on our external network, or maybe there's a host that we know has tried to deliver to us and didn't retry delivery, then we whitelist that client as well. Likewise, we can perform exception whitelists based on the recipient email address. So, for instance, an email to the CEO in your company, you might want to say, okay, never whitelist any mail which is being delivered to him or to postmaster or an important email address that you don't want to be subject to email address or to graylisting. So we've got basically, other than that, there's only two configuration parameters associated with graylisting. I'll talk maybe first about the mail delay. So basically, by default, we have a mail delay of 300 seconds, 5 minutes. So basically, what that says is, when we graylist a server, we basically say don't retry for 5 minutes. Now, if they retry within that period, they'll get another rejection. It's only if they retry after 5 minutes that we'll accept the message and process it. And even if a compliant mail server does happen to try delivery during that 5-minute period, because it's a compliant mail server, it'll just put it back into the defer queue and try again. And typically, all mail servers will keep their mail in a mail queue for up to 5 days. The other feature we have here is the auto whitelisting of clients. So basically, once we get 5 successful mail deliveries from a particular client or IP address, we'll automatically whitelist that IP address. We can disable this feature by setting it to 0, but I think the fact that auto whitelisting is probably a good thing to do, so it should always be enabled. So that's pretty much graylisting in a nutshell. The next feature we'll talk about is role-based administration. Again, this is a feature which has been requested for some time. Effectively, we were allowed 3 levels of role-based administration within the product. Some of the tasks that users in the past wanted to do is allow the ability for administrators to delegate part of the work to other administrators, but maybe not want to give them everything they want that's available via the administrator's interface. So, for example, you can create an admin role which can just manage policies. You can create an admin role which can just view history and reporting, or you might just want to create an admin role which can modify modify and add, edit existing domain settings. At the domain level, we had domain administration prior to 6.00, but in this version, we have the ability to basically define a role and define what permissions each domain-based administrator is allowed to perform. So again, you can have a administrator with full access rights, which you can modify their policies, modify their domain settings, modify and view their history, or you can have just a domain administrator, which is able to be, for instance, a report manager and just view reports for that domain. And likewise, at the user level, we've got the same role-based administration with access rights, where you can define what an end user can and cannot do and see. So, for instance, in 5.13, all that an end user was allowed to do was change their password, view and modify their whitelists and blacklists, and manage their quarantine settings and view their quarantine. In 6.00, they can have additional rights to view their history, or to manage the policy. For instance, they can change the spam threshold that they want. They can disable spam filtering if they want, disable virus, ban attachment filtering. So these are the kind of things that where administrators want to push down the whole management of the appliance to the users themselves, let them manage their own settings, their own quarantine, and take that workload off the administrators themselves. So maybe I'll just go through the UI with the role-based administration changes, show you in more detail what can and cannot be done. Okay, so under the anti-spam engine, we've got two new tabs here, roles and permissions and admins. So the first thing you want to do is create new roles. Now 6.00 comes with 3 canned roles, one for the administrator, one for the domain administrator, and one for the user roles. For the administrator role, they can basically do everything that they could do in the existing. So when you log in as administrator now, you're effectively the administrator role. We see here there's 2 other roles which I've created earlier. We've got an admin history role. So if I just have a look at this, basically all that this role is allowed to do is view the history, nothing else. So if we go here to the admins tab, we can see the list of admins that we've created already. So we have the system-defined admin role, which cannot be modified, and we've got 2 other admins which have been created earlier. One has the admin history role, and one has an example reporting manager role. So again, the admin history role can just view the history. So if we impersonate this user just to see what they can do, we'll see, okay, they get the dashboard, but beyond the dashboard, all they're allowed to do is view the history under the reporting tab. Everything else is off limits to them. What's new in 6.00 is we can also stop impersonating rather than having to log out of the user interface when we're impersonating a user and have to log back in as the administrator. We can just simply stop impersonating and go back to the page that we were on previously. So for the domain administrators, as before, we can define a domain administrator under the domain policies page. So for instance, we have for this domain example.org, we've got a domain administrator report manager at example.org, and we can define what administrator role they have. So by default, they'll just get the system default administrator role, but we're going to give this user a domain administrator role with all privileges. And so basically what that is, they can do things now. For instance, they can manage their domain settings that they couldn't do previously in 5.13. So we'll just impersonate this user. Again, we see, okay, pretty much the same as what a domain administrator could see prior to 6.00. But again, the additional things are they can manage their policy and they can manage the relay settings. So again, this is just basically, okay, change the destination server, pretty much everything you had on the mail relay setup page under the main administrator interface. And the additional thing that if you give a domain administrator all privileges, they can also view their history, generate reports for their domain, schedule reports for their domain. So pretty much they can basically do so much more than they could do previously. The next feature we're going to talk about is the ability to specify multiple destination servers. in previous versions of SpamTitan, when you specify domains that you're going to relay mail for, you specified one destination mail server. If that destination mail server was down, SpamTitan would simply queue the mail until they could send to that server. In 6.00, we have the ability to specify multiple destination mail servers per domain, and we've got several different settings that we can use. So, for instance, if your primary destination mail server is down, we can specify multiple backups. Likewise, we can specify multiple destination mail servers which may be used in a round-robin fashion. And thirdly, we can specify a MX record which can be used as the destination mail server. So then using the MX records, we can have multiple MX records which we'll use in order of priority. Okay, so going back to the UI then. If we get back at it here, we're going to go to the system setup and mail relay page. And we'll just go through the features for the multiple destination servers per domain. So again, we have got 5 domains set up here. The first domain, domain.net, has a destination server of domain.net. Okay, so that looks a bit odd. If we have a look at that again, we see that enable MX lookup is selected. So what that means is the appliance will perform a MX lookup of domain.net, find out it's got MX records, maybe 5 MX records, and we'll attempt to deliver to those in order of priority. We don't have to specify domain.net here. We could have specified, SpamTitan.com, for instance, or whatever. It doesn't have to be the same as the domain that we're relaying mail for. The next one is SpamTitan.com, where we have basically two destination servers specified, with the separator character being a space. So basically, when we use a separator of a space, we basically are saying, try the first server first of all. If that fails, fall back to the second server. Finally, then for WebTitan.com, you can see that the separator character is a comma. In this case, we'll basically round robin between these two servers. So one mail might go to the first server, the next mail might go to the next one. When I say round robin, it's quasi round robin because basically they'll basically randomly choose one of the servers to deliver mail to. The management of Alias has been extended in version 6 to allow more than just Active Directory users use the aliases feature. Prior to 6.00, we only allowed aliases to be imported from Active Directory or Exchange servers. In this version, we allow find your aliases or imported from a flat text file. So if your backend mail server is, for instance, Postfix or SendMail or Zimbra, you can basically just define your own aliases, import them, or define them manually. Okay, so going back to the user interface, under the quarantine aliases page, we can see where we can manage our aliases. So we can still import from Microsoft Exchange if we still have if we have Exchange as our backend mail server to import our aliases from there, or we can import them from a flat text file or add them manually. So let's just add a couple here manually. So we've got Tom at SpamTitan.com. Okay, so we'll say he's got 2 aliases. He's got his primary email address, and he say got tom.surname at SpamTitan.com as well. Just save those; they'll appear on the list. So basically, what this means now is any mail, whenever Tom logs into the user interface, he's going to see in his quarantine all mails addressed to tom at SpamTitan.com and tom.surname at SpamTitan.com. Likewise, when he gets a quarantine report, he'll, rather than getting 2 quarantine reports, one for Tom surname at SpamTitan.com and one for Tom at SpamTitan.com, he'll get one consolidated quarantine report containing the quarantined items that were delivered to both email addresses. So that's pretty much the aliases feature in a nutshell. It does basically mean the users get, they can manage everything from the user interface from one account rather than having to log into multiple accounts, and it also means you get one quarantine report than multiple quarantine reports.